morning, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Breaking News. Today is Wednesday, the 16th day of April, 2025. And it's gotten to the place of absurdity, namely the discussions between the U.S. and Iran with respect to Iran's nuclear program, the words of Steve Witkoff. In fact, his statement yesterday was so ambiguous, it's been seen by some to have him backpedaling from what he'd said the night before. In other words, he did a reversal in 24 hours of the previous position. Others thought he was saying something else. In other words, it was so ambiguous, no one really knows for sure what he was saying. However, it won't matter anyway because we have the statement from Iran about their feeling about the idea of their stopping enrichment of uranium. So here are the headlines. In swift reversal, Witkoff said any nuclear deal must eliminate Iran's enrichment, weaponization. That's from the Times of Israel. So according to the Times of Israel, he made a reversal from the day before. Now, Iran, on its part, says its right to enrich uranium is non-negotiable. In other words, we're going to do it no matter what the U.S. says. So, where do we go from here? And then, of course, what we've mentioned so often here from virtual Jerusalem, amateur envoy Witkoff's diplomatic slips risk U.S. security. And that's the understatement of the year. Now, here's the summary. While Donald Trump said the making of a deal with Iran would be easy, it's become anything but that. Iran has made their position clear on their enrichment of uranium. No deal. We will never stop doing this. So the only question now seemingly is, will Trump keep his promise by bombing Iran to keep them from producing a nuclear weapon and a delivery system to send the bomb to Israel and eventually to the United States of America? That's the big question. We're early in the morning here. It's just after 5 a.m. on the West Coast. So we're just waking up. And so hopefully we'll have some statement by the U.S. today at some time where we can give you on our next edition of Breaking News, because they got to give some responses we're going to see. And so we'll wait for that. Now, today in our program, Your Bible Questions Answered, we look at another major event of Holy Week, namely the Olivet Discourse, where Jesus predicted God's destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, seeing that they rejected him as the promised Messiah. We're going to see how that all fits in with God's program for time and eternity. Very, very important. Matthew 24:25. We'll summarize that today. So please join us. If you haven't already, we've been since Sunday doing the events of Holy Week. Palm Sunday, we looked at that. We looked at the cleansing of the temple. We also looked at the cursing of the fig tree. And today we're going to look at the Olivet Discourse, Jesus pronouncing judgment on the city and the temple and his plan for time and eternity that he lists in these two chapters of Matthew. All right, now to the headlines. This one here is another head scratcher. According to the Times of Israel, in swift reversal, Witkoff says any nuclear deal must eliminate Iran's enrichment weaponization. This again, White House Special Envoy Steve Witkoff said Tuesday that any agreement on Iran's rogue nuclear weapons program would require the Islamic Republic to stop and eliminate its nuclear enrichment and weaponization program. It was an about face for Witkoff, who had indicated a day earlier, contrary to Israel's position, that Washington would be satisfied with a cap on Iranian nuclear enrichment and would not require the dismantling of its nuclear facilities. Again, it depends how you read it. You could read this thing either way, and that's the problem here. So the article goes on to say, a deal with Iran, quoting Witkoff, will only be completed if it's a Trump deal. He said this in a statement in the office's official X account, formerly Twitter. Any final arrangement must set a framework for peace, stability, and prosperity in the Middle East, meaning that Iran must stop and eliminate its nuclear enrichment and weaponization program. It's imperative for the world that we create a tough, fair deal that will endure, and that is what President Trump has asked me to do, said Witkoff on Saturday, who on Saturday commenced nuclear talks with Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. All right. So basically, as the article says, on Monday, the day before, in a Fox TV interview, Witkoff had indicated that the administration was seeking a deal that would limit rather than destroy Iran's nuclear program, with a low-level cap on uranium enrichment and checks that Iran was not advancing potential weaponization. The next round of talks with Iran, he said, would focus on verification of the enrichment program and ultimately verification on weaponization. That includes missiles, the types of missiles that they have stockpiled there, and it includes the trigger for a bomb. All right, so in 2 days, from Monday to Tuesday, he said things that are so ambiguous that it's been taken so many different ways. Some is very positive, some is very negative with respect to Israel, and it's extremely unclear. But it's not going to really matter because of our next headline. Headline number two from the Jerusalem Post: Iran says its right to enrich uranium is non-negotiable. Iran and the U.S. are due to hold a second round of talks in Oman on Saturday over Tehran's escalating nuclear program, with President Donald Trump threatening military action if there is no deal. Iran's right to enrich uranium is not negotiable, according to Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, what he said today, Wednesday, ahead of a second round of talks in Oman this weekend with the United States and Tehran about their disputed nuclear program. He was responding to a comment made Tuesday by the U.S. top negotiator Steve Witkoff, who said Tehran must stop and eliminate its nuclear enrichment to reach a deal with Washington. And here's what he said: We have heard contradictory statements from Witkoff. We sure have, but real positions will be made clear at the negotiating table. In other words, we're making it very clear our position, and we'll see what the U.S. does. Get this, we are ready to build trust. This is the key word regarding possible concerns over Iran's enrichment of uranium, but the principle of enrichment is not negotiable. Now, this is what Witkoff stupidly said before the first meeting. The whole idea is to build trust between us and Iran. And as we've said, you can't trust Iran. You never have been able to. In the last 20, 25 years, they've lied about everything that they're doing and working on nuclear enrichment to their missile work, where they can get a bomb and a delivery system to hit Israel first and the U.S. second. That's been their whole goal the last 20, 25 years, and they've said it over and over again. And so Witkoff dumbly said, well, we're going to get trust between the two of us, and not realizing you can't trust these people. And so, again, like Araghchi said, the principle of enrichment is non-negotiable. We're never going to talk about that. So Iran and the U.S. are due to hold a second round of talks, and it'll be this Saturday, and it'll be in Rome this time, over Tehran's escalating nuclear program, with Donald Trump threatening military action. All right, now what's interesting, before the talks, Araghchi is going to deliver a message from Iran's Supreme Leader Khamenei to Russian President Putin on a trip to Russia, Iranian state media reported today, Wednesday. The Kremlin on Tuesday declined to comment when asked if Russia was ready to take control of Iran's stocks of enriched uranium as part of a possible future nuclear deal between Iran and the United States. Can you imagine of getting enriched uranium, which leading to, of course, nuclear is something, the bombs Russia already has, but giving it to Russia of all people. Anyway, they declined to comment on whether they'll take it or not. UK Guardian reporting that Tehran was expected to reject their U.S. proposal to transfer it. We talked about this yesterday, to transfer a stockpile of enriched uranium to a third country, such as Russia, as part of the agreement that Washington is seeking to scale back Iran's nuclear program. So here's the question: how's the U.S. going to respond to this? Will they simply accept Iran's position, namely they'll never dismantle their nuclear program? If so, what's there to discuss? We're waiting for the U.S. response, and hopefully we'll get something today. And so they've been put in this position because they have not been clear. And nobody, again, there's articles from the Israeli press about how Netanyahu doesn't understand what the U.S. is trying to do. The statements are so ambiguous, people are taken either way. And the comments are not very kind to the U.S. Donald Trump. These people, basically, to sum up what they've said, the U.S. doesn't seem to know what it's doing. They can't make it clear what their long-term goals are. They threaten military action, but then they talk about in the next breath, we're going to have this great deal that's going to keep Iran from having a nuclear weapon. So which is it? Well, hopefully today we'll get some more information on this and clarity from the U.S. Now, headline number three. This is the whole problem. And this is from Virtual Jerusalem. Amateur envoy Witkoff's diplomatic slips risk U.S. security. Amateurish handling of Iran, Gaza, and Ukraine crisis reveals troubling conflicts in the envoy's real estate ties with Qatar. The almost failed real estate mogul is deeply indebted to the Qataris, and it shows in his obsequious and uncritical negotiating, quite possibly extending to the Iranian nuclear talks as well. In other words, he's so much in bed with Qatar. This is the problem when, basically because Qatar is a mediator between Israel and Hamas. And so he's compromised, is what the article was saying. Steve Witkoff, appointed by former President Donald Trump as the special envoy for Middle East negotiations, is at the heart of several critical diplomatic issues, each fraught with complexity and potential for strategic error. Despite a high-stakes role requiring precision and deep geopolitical understanding, Witkoff's controversial handling of talks involving Iran, Gaza, and Ukraine have raised serious concern over his competency and potential conflicts of interest linked to his significant financial dealings with Qatar. In the latest round of nuclear negotiations between the U.S. and Iran held in Muscat, Oman, Witkoff has signaled unprecedented flexibility. Departing significantly from the Trump administration's earlier insistence on dismantling Iran's nuclear capabilities entirely, Witkoff has indicated openness to permitting Tehran to retain enrichment levels up to 3.67%, the very threshold set in the Obama era Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which they never did. Of course, they enrich uranium to some 60% now, at least. Such a shift is perceived by many in Washington and Jerusalem as a dangerous concession that risks enabling Iran's continued nuclear ambitions. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei cautiously welcomed the renewed talks, but reaffirmed Tehran's red lines. Now, again, let's get this. Notably rejecting U.S. proposals to move Iran's enriched uranium stockpile to a third country such as Russia, Tehran insists on retaining control of this material within Iran, overseen by the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, meaning they want to have complete control of it, citing previous U.S. withdrawal from agreements as justification for distrust. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy has increased military presence by deploying the USS Carl Vinson aircraft carrier to join the USS Harry Truman in the Arabian Sea, a clear signal of American skepticism and readiness should diplomacy falter. Witkoff's handling of the Gaza ceasefire negotiations also sparked criticism after his admission that American diplomats were deceived by Hamas's representatives, resulting in strategic error. Egypt and Jordan, mediating the ceasefire talks, have expressed frustration at what they see as unrealistic Israeli demands encouraged by Witkoff's inexperienced diplomatic team. An Egyptian official recently noted that even Trump himself recognized Israel's demands had become illogical, further undermining confidence in Witkoff's ability to guide complex negotiations towards successful outcomes. Compounding these diplomatic setbacks is Witkoff's controversial stance on Ukraine, where his positions have alarmed European and American allies. Witkoff reportedly proposed that peace negotiation with Russia, including recognition of Moscow's annexation of Ukrainian territories, it was a position immediately rejected by Kiev. Additionally, his informal engagement with Russian officials, including hosting Kirill Dmitriev, a sanctioned envoy, at his personal residence, raised bipartisan alarm in Washington. Such casual disregard for diplomatic protocol has sparked bipartisan concerns that Witkoff's amateurish approach risks legitimizing Russian aggression and destabilizing NATO solidarity. Further deepening these concerns is Witkoff's substantial financial involvement with Qatar through his real estate ventures. In 2023, he sold the Manhattan iconic Park Lane Hotel to the Qatar Investment Authority for $623 million. Qatar's intricate network of geopolitical relationships, including controversial ties to Iran, Hamas, and other Islamic groups, have fueled serious questions regarding the potential influence these financial connections may have on Witkoff's decision-making process. All right, to sum up, it should seem obvious to everyone that any potential deal that Iran would agree to does not even begin to solve the problem of them attaining a nuclear weapon and eventually using it against Israel. And you have a totally incompetent person talking to Iran, talking to Russia, and talking to Hamas, and he's really out of his league. So here's the key. We're waiting for the U.S. to respond. Hopefully, this time they will speak unambiguously. They certainly have not done this far, and if they do, or whatever they say today, we'll report it later on our second edition of Breaking News. It is really a sad testimony to the lack of clarity and understanding that the U.S. has with this administration with respect to these three major issues: Ukraine, Iran, and Hamas. All right, we'll be back with you later today, and hopefully, like we said, we'll get some clarity, and then we'll see where we go from there. I'm Don Stewart. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, until next time, may the Lord richly, richly bless.